Okay, let's move on to the final talk of the Meet the Fellows event. So we'll have Alex Lombardi, who will see that he slightly changed the title, but he will talk about quantum advantage and non-local games.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. So yeah, I'll be talking, so the technical meat of what I talk about anyway will be based on a joint work with Yael Kalai, my advisor, Vinod Vaikunthanathan, and Lisa Yang. Since this is the Meet the Fellows event, let me give a quick self-introduction first. So I am a postdoc here for this year. I finished my PhD at MIT in the fall. And while I'm very broadly interested in basically anything vaguely related to cryptography and anything vaguely related to the theory of computation, a lot of what I've worked on over the last, 5 years has been focused on this area that I like to informally call cryptographic proofs. So I'm not going to define this very carefully, but basically I'm talking about questions in a computational model where you have two parties, a prover and a verifier, and the prover wants to convince the verifier of some piece of information, and I'll leave it that vaguely because there are different ways of like instantiating this this kind of question. And so why do I seem to keep working in this area? Why do I like it so much? Well, it allows you to combine three really powerful and really flexible computational resources into one place. So the first of these is interaction. We allow the two parties to communicate with each other back and forth. The second is randomness, or depending on the setting, maybe even quantum information. So what does that mean? It means that I can send you not just a message, but maybe a message from a distribution, or I can have an internal quantum state and measure my states to determine what message to send to you, things like this. And then finally, the third resource is computational hardness. And by that, I mean that in these protocols, we're often happy, even if certain guarantees of this protocol only hold against computationally bounded parties. The prover or the verifier we assume is computationally bounded, and then we prove something must happen. And when you combine all these three things together, you get basically magic, just like some ridiculous stuff happens. And I'm very interested in trying to understand precisely what kinds of magic you can and cannot do. So this model has been really influential in both theory and in practical cryptography, although I assume this is mostly a theory audience, but like, from like the theoretical end of just like general purpose secure multi-party computation to like on the very practical end of like our like current systems for authentication on the internet and our and also like postmodern applications like blockchains and cryptocurrencies. Proof systems are sort of a foundation underlying all of this stuff. And then the area also seems to have a great track record in its interactions with other areas of theoretical computer science. Insights about proof systems have turned out to tell us a lot of things in the realm of complexity theory, whether it's about directly about interactive proofs, how they characterize piece-based computation. These things went on to influence questions not obviously about interactive proofs like the PCP theorem. In game theory, we've recently come up with characterizations of the hardness of finding Nash equilibria in terms of based on, or we've proven that such problems are hard, assuming cryptographic assumptions going through proof systems. And also recently, we've seen that proof systems have a lot to say about the nature of quantum computation and demonstrating that you have a quantum computer or just proving that you've done a certain kind of quantum computation. So this last thing, or something in this last regime, is what I'm actually going to focus on for this talk. So today we're going to just talk about how you could possibly prove that you are quantum. And so what do I mean by this? Roughly speaking, I mean, suppose you have a quantum device. And suppose that you want to convince somebody who does not have a quantum device that you have a quantum device. And so since they don't have a quantum device, you are limited to interacting with them classically. You can only send them classical messages, but you want them to believe somehow that you have a quantum device. So how do you do that? So there are a couple of things you could do. One is what I would call like the very direct approach of just like, so here's something you can do. The classical, from now on, I'll call them the verifier. The classical verifier can send me the description of an NP problem. say, an NP search problem, and they can ask me, to give them an NP witness. And if this NP search problem is also in BQP, in quantum polynomial time, and I have at least a quantum polynomial time computer, then I can find this witness, and then I can hand it to them. They can verify the NP relation, and we're done. And so solving like a factoring or discrete logarithm type problem would exactly allow you to do this. Also, due to a recent breakthrough last year by Yamakawa and Zandra, we actually know that this kind of quantum advantage actually exists relative to a random oracle, which is pretty amazing. So this is what I would call the direct approach. But so what I want to emphasize right now about this direct approach is that in order to do this, you are essentially assuming away the problem in some sense. That is, you are just literally assuming that there is a computational problem that cannot be solved in classical polynomial time that can be solved in quantum polynomial time. And there's no way around it if this is your approach. So now let me talk about a second option. This was introduced in a really interesting work of Brzezinski, Cristiano, Mahadev, Vazirani, and Vidic a few years ago. They introduced like what is now called an interactive proof of quantumness. And it's basically, it's a similar idea, except now we allow the prover and the verifier to interact. They execute an interactive protocol. At the end, we with the quantum device would like the verifier to accept. And we want a protocol where at least no efficient classical device can make the verifier accept with a similar probability. And so something that I find really interesting about this object is that you can possibly have them like without knowing whether or not BQP is equal to P, which sounds kind of ridiculous if we started with how do I prove that I'm doing efficient quantum computation, and now I'm saying we don't even need to assume P not equal BQP, but this is something ridiculous that the interactive model throws at us. And in very few words, like how is this possible? Like how do you separate efficient quantum and classical computation without assuming a classically hard problem that's quantumly easy? Somehow you separate these two models by thinking about rewinding. So an interesting thing in the interactive model is that you can sort of analyze what's going on by imagining that you run a party forwards through the protocol and then try to go back in time and see what they would say if you sent them a different message, like in the middle of the protocol execution or something like that. And this is something that you can easily talk about if the party is classical, because you can save their states and then just, tell them to resume from an earlier point in time. But with a quantum device, this might be inherently impossible due to no cloning type issues. Or another way to put it is that, like, in order to get their message at some point in time, they may have measured their state in a destructive way that is not reversible. And that's how you can separate these two models. So in this paper that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we give a new family of interactive proofs of quantumness by making a very direct connection to this thing called quantum non-locality. And I will just show this to you by example. So let me I'll give you an extremely simple protocol for proving quantumness. Here's how it works. The verifier picks a random bit x. So x is just one bit. It encrypts the bit with some encryption scheme. I haven't said anything about it yet, and sends the ciphertext to the prover. That's what happened so far. And the verifier in this protocol expects the prover to send back some ciphertext for this encryption scheme. Whatever the prover sends, the verifier will interpret it as a ciphertext. Next, the verifier samples an independent second bit y and sends this bit to the prover, and the prover responds with some bit b. So we've got 4 bits that we care about. We have x, we have a, which I'll call the decryption of whatever the prover sent, and then y and v. X and y are sampled IID by the verifier and sent to the prover in this way, and the prover responds somehow. And the verifier accepts in this protocol if a linear condition is satisfied between a and b, the 2 bits that the prover is effectively communicating. So you check that the sum of a and b is equal to the AND of the 2 bits that the verifier sampled. And note that the prover does not know what x is. It has an encryption of x, but it doesn't know what x is. So it doesn't exactly know what condition the verifier is checking. But there's a protocol that you can run. And we prove that if the encryption scheme is appropriately homomorphic, if you can sort of evaluate some gates on a ciphertext, then there is an efficient quantum device here, or efficient quantum algorithm for the prover that does better than what any efficient classical algorithm can do provably. Yeah, assuming that the encryption is secure. This is what we show. So it's an extremely simple protocol, and if you've seen anything like this before, this should probably remind you of something. So this is directly inspired from a proof system in a different computational model. So this thing that I've written on the slide is called the CHSH game. It's a game between a verifier and two provers. So this is an information theoretic model. So the provers are unbounded, but we assume they can't communicate with each other. And the CHSH game is a proof system in this model, which looks almost exactly like what I just told you. The only difference now is that each of the provers gets one of the bits from the verifier, and they're supposed to respond to those bits separately. And so, yeah, so this model has been studied for a long time in quantum information theory. And I mean, even in non-quantum settings also, there's nothing inherently quantum about this model. But so the point is that if the two provers in this game are allowed to share some entanglement, it turns out that they can beat any classical quote unquote strategy. So, and I won't show you how this works, but it turns out that if the two provers share an EPR pair, they can make the verifier accept the probability about 85%. But also, if they don't share entanglement, they can't beat 0.75 in this game. And the analysis for this fact is like 2 lines. So I'll just show it to you as a reminder. So let's see why you can't beat 75% classically. Well, if the two provers are classical, then essentially 4 bits describe the strategy, just what their answers are to each of the possible 2 questions that they get sent. So we'll call those 4 numbers A0, A1, B0, and B1. And the claim is simply that you can't get the at most 3 of the 4 things that you want to be true can be true. And so here, I mean, I'm sure any of you could prove this in about 2 minutes, but let me show you one particular way of deriving this. So here are the 2 equations for fixed prover 1 question X, and for the 2 questions sent to prover 2, B equals 0 and B equals 1. So if the provers are right on X comma 0, you know that AX plus B0 is 0. And if they're right on X comma 1, then AX plus B1 is equal to X. But if they're right on both of these, then you can combine the 2 equations and get that B0 plus B1 is equal to X. However, X is sampled uniformly at random, independent of the view of prover 2, and B0 and B1 are just depend on prover 2. And so this derived condition can only happen with probability 1/2. And so you get that overall, you can only do 0.75 well. So this is the information theoretic analysis. And now I'll show you that we proved essentially the same thing for this interactive game. So let me just point to like the key differences from the previous setting. So in the previous setting, we used the fact that, or at least the model, explicitly states that sort of the 2 provers are independent of each other, right? So here, sort of the prover 1 is certainly can't depend on prover 2, right? Because prover 2 literally happens afterwards. However, prover 2 can depend on prover 1, and that's the difference, right? However, prover 2 doesn't really know what prover 1 did because the question was encrypted, and that's why there's some hope of this being reasonable. And indeed, what we're going to show is that if the prover cannot break the encryption scheme, then you can't beat 0.75 in this computational game. So the proof is very similar. So if the prover is classical, we can describe it with 3 functions. There's the function which determines the second message based on the first message. And then there are 2 functions that determines the final bit the prover sends, depending on whether y equals 0 or y equals 1 is sent. Okay. And so we claim that you can't beat 0.75. And the reason is, well, let's think about this fixed prover strategy. And let's fix the first message in the protocol. And then let's suppose for a second that the prover were right on both the y equals 0 and y equals 1 questions. then we get these two conditions. So so this A sub x hat, I'm defining to be just the decryption of A hat. And yeah, so if the prover is right on 0 and 1, we get these two constraints. But if these are both correct, then we again get that B0 and B1, these are functions of x hat, that they XOR to x, the same as before. So in other words, so if the prover answers both questions correctly, then this B0 plus B1 piece of information predicts the encrypted bit x, only given the ciphertext x hat. But that shouldn't be possible. This is an efficient reduction. If the encryption scheme is secure, then there's nothing that we should be able to write down that actually predicts x with probability better than 1/2. And so you get that you can't, yeah. So if you did better than 0.75, you would predict the encrypted bit with probability better than 1/2, and so you can't. And so this is a computational, analog of the lower bound on the CHSH game against local strategies. And now the punchline is that this is completely general. That was a special case, but you can actually show that for any non-local game, we have this general compiler which does exactly what you just saw, that like turns prover 1 into like an encrypted strategy, and then turns prover 2 into a strategy in the clear that happens after the fact. And we show that if the encryption scheme is homomorphic enough, then first of all, you can emulate any entangled strategy on a single device with a single prover. Meanwhile, if the encryption scheme is secure, then a classical device can't be, like in the interactive game, can do no better than a local strategy in this two-prover game. And so you can inherit any like entangled versus unentangled gap into a quantum versus classical gap in the interactive setting, in the computationally bounded interactive setting. And there are a bunch of questions that I'd love to understand better, like in this regime, for example, if you care about only specific constant size games, the amount of homomorphism you need here is very small. And so I'd hoped for results of something of the form like you can do this based on any post-quantum one-way function or something like that. That would be a very nice result. There are more practical aspects maybe you can get like a really efficient quantum strategy here if you choose things very carefully. And finally, like the quantum value of this interactive game, understanding it in general is still wide open. Like there's some ongoing work where we can understand it in some very special cases, but in most cases we don't really know how to talk about the quantum value of this game. It's related to questions about rewinding quantum devices. And yeah, so I also like this question because of this complexity theoretic implication of like you don't even need to assume P not equal to BQP in order to plausibly have it. It's also not known whether you need P does not equal NP for this thing. So I think essentially all that's known about the complexity of interactive proofs of quantumness is that you need to assume P not equal to P space because you can compute the optimal prover strategy in P space. And I think that's basically all that's known. And I'd love to understand better like what the complexity theoretic implications of this kind of object is. So that's all. Thank you.
A little over time, but maybe we could take a question to round off the program.
What if you want to prove quantumness non-interactively? Is the search problem paradigm that we want?
Let's see. I think just like, I think just computing a message that would make the verifier accept will be an NP intersect BQP search problem.
So I'm not sure how much I followed, but you mentioned that you don't want to assume away the problem. But I guess I was wondering if you show proof of quantumness from any other assumption, why are you not interpreting that as evidence of a separation?
Because you can do this, assuming the hardness of learning with errors. And it's believed that learning with errors is quantumly hard. Like the assumption is potentially agnostic to whether or not the adversary is quantum or classical.
Yeah, so,
Oh, and sorry, the reason is that there's the proof of security sort of distinguishes, like the way that you analyze this distinguishes quantum and classical devices in a way that doesn't require making an assumption. Like the proof that I just here, maybe I went over it too fast, but like what I said here was that a classical device can't win here because it would be able to predict X if I ran it twice. Right, I ran it twice to get this B0 and B1, and then I said, well, I can get X by writing down the sum. At least I can predict X by writing down the sum. But if the prover is quantum, then the second time that you run it, there's no guarantee that even if it was successful originally, that it would send you a valid answer later. And so the proof is actually separating the models. The assumption doesn't have to.
Yeah, let's maybe take further questions offline. Let's thank all the speakers for making it great event. Thanks to all, of course, for coming. And we have a light lunch